We're about to get started here. Kathy and Travis in the room. Gonna put up the video feed in a moment. Can you all hear me? I'm not getting feedback. Oh, okay. Yay. So I'm once again in a place with potentially poor connectivity. So hopefully you'll bear with me. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Just waiting for Skye Fitzgerald. Okay. Connection seems good. Wonderful. Yeah, the camera's once again very close to my face. Oh, well, we'll have to deal with it. Yeah, so welcome to the Pangburn Hangout. I'm your host, Masha Yaga's daughter. I'm just one of many broadcasters on the Pangburn Hangout. Probably the only thing that we all have in common is commitment to free speech and good faith engagement on all sorts of topics across political and ideological belongings, identities, foundational beliefs. So we try to talk in a human way about all sorts of issues. So today we are going to be speaking with Skye Fitzgerald. Hopefully he's able to join us pretty soon and I can bring him up. How's everyone feeling today on this Wednesday, I believe it is? Yeah, good. Cool. I've been watching a lot of difficult material in preparation for this interview because Skye Fitzgerald is a documentary filmmaker, and the topics that he covers are rather grim. So I've definitely, probably engaged with a maximum level of trauma for now. I'm gonna have to I have a lot of work to do in the gym to get rid of all of that really negative energy, I have to say. So it's been a difficult one. So I hope that we're able to get Skye up here and speak to him. I'm seeing some good friends in the room. Welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you. Yeah, I hope your week's been great so far and continues to be really good. So yeah, I will probably. Hello, Bob. How's it going? I'll probably just introduce Skye while we wait for him to come into the room. Skye Fitzgerald has built a career documenting human rights and social justice issues around the world. He has shot for Dateline NBC, CNN, the History Channel, the Travel Channel, and ABC. Fitzgerald most recently directed a trilogy of films on the global refugee crisis, including Hunger Ward, which is part of the 2022 ACT Film Festival. He's also been nominated for the Oscar Awards in documentary filmmaking multiple times. Some of the films that have garnered a lot of attention include obviously Hunger Ward, 50 Feet from Syria, Lifeboat, which I just watched, Finding Face, Bomb Hunters, 101 Seconds, and Behind the Bullet. Oh, wow. Okay. So there's some drama in the chat already. I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, hello. I think that we have been joined by Skye. All right. I'm just going to invite him up. Skye, I think I've sent you the invitation to speak. There we go. You can accept my invitation and then we can begin our talk. There we go. Okay, I'm going to promote you to moderator and then you'll be able to share your camera as well as your audio with us. In the meantime, for those of you who don't know already, Callin is a social podcasting app. styled on the sort of like radio call-in shows. So we make a meeting together by speaking with interesting people, and then we open up the phone lines, the lines for the audience to call in and engage with broadcasters and guests. Skye, if you're able to unmute. I think I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. Hello and welcome.
Yeah. Hey, thanks.
Great to have you. I'm not sure if you were in the room. I already introduced you. I'm not sure if it was sufficient or if there are other things that you would like to add.
I was trying to figure out the login. I thought
okay.
For some reason I thought it was just a Zoom, and obviously it's not.
No, it's its own platform. So
yeah,
we are.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have kind of the beta going for this particular social podcasting platform for the video aspect of it. So it's still sometimes a little bit buggy, and it takes people a moment to figure out, especially once we are able to start taking some calls, and I hope we get a chance to do that. I know that we have a kind of a tight timeline today, so so our booking teams let us know that you are filming right now. Are you able to tell us what is the subject of your current project?
Not really.
Not really?
No. In a month I can, but it's kind of a hush-hush project.
Oh, okay. Broadly, where in the world are you?
Well, right now I'm in the States, but I won't be in a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Great. That's very interesting. So I'm fully traumatized by watching your documentaries in preparation for this interview. So
I'm sorry to hear that. It's not the intent, but I know that's the result sometimes.
Yeah. Do you ever watch your own films back?
I try not to. But at screenings, I'll often step in for the last 5 minutes or so, before Q&As. So yeah, I watch parts of them, but usually just the last 5 minutes.
All right.
You put so much time into the creation, right? That by the time you get to the end, you know every frame and every detail. So really, there's no need to watch it yet again.
Of course, and to what extent are you part of the editing and cutting and all of that stuff? Is that those are your editorial choices, or is that someone else? You kind of hand over the material and then you're done, or how does that happen?
Yeah, I think every artist has their own process, their own creative process. Mine for film is I'm just a big believer in working with those who are better at what they do than what you are, right? So surrounding yourself with creative genius. And so I've worked with the same editor for the last 6 films, and then the same composer for the last 9 projects. So we kind of have a creative shorthand, but that it's a very intimate creative shorthand. So we work very closely together. But he does the edit, but sort of at my direction. So it's a highly collaborative process.
Yeah, great. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of material to go through, and a lot that maybe doesn't make it into the film, and that must be another excruciating part of the process. I was thinking about that as I was watching The Hunger Word, particularly because of the intimacy of these stories that you feature. I can't imagine making those choices. What parts end up in the film and not. So yeah. You talked about selecting stories that pass the so what test. So you you talked about them being important, timely, and building empathy. Can you expand on that for our listeners?
Yeah, this is just some, I during the course of my work, I just sort of came up with this. It's a personal threshold, right? Because each of us, get to choose how we spend every minute on this planet. And in my work, it feels like, because we don't know how long each of us is here. I could be gone tomorrow, you could be gone tomorrow. And so I take it really seriously which projects I engage in. And if I'm going to do a project, for better or for worse, I'm kind of all in on them. So I don't just kind of half-ass do projects. If I'm, I commit 1,000% when I commit to a project. And so in order to do that, part of my belief system is it needs to be something that's vital and current and contemporary, and something most importantly that is on an issue that perhaps doesn't get as much coverage as it should in the traditional media, but also that we can intervene on in the real world. I'm not, even though I love archive docs sometimes, right? It's not what I want to do. I want to do a doc on something that's unfolding in real time right now that we can look at and say, wow, how do we address this as a global community, right? How do we intervene in some form or fashion and make it better? And so to meet those criteria, it has to pass my own personal so what test, right? Is this something we should care about? Is it something we don't hear enough about? Is it something we can intervene on and somehow transform into a better place through engaging with the topic in the film? So, I'm sure other people have different names for this concept, but it's just what I came up with over the years as sort of my own process of selecting and choosing what kind of work I want to do.
A lot comes to mind because you talked about the verite style, and then there's certainly in the interviews you definitely bridge that gap towards activism. In your films themselves, I'm not sure that there's a really clear call to action other than sort of foregrounding civil society and those non-state NGO actors that are intervening. I have a lot of questions there. I'll start with, how do you, are projects pitched to you, or do you come across certain issues that speak to you? Let's start there.
Yeah, if I were a wiser filmmaker and a smarter business person, then I would work in a different way. But the short answer to your question is that over time, I have been very intentional about the nature of my work. And so, I'm not independently wealthy, but I've been a working filmmaker for decades. And over time, I decided that I wanted to continue to work on the spectrum of work where at one point, 90% of my work was for other people as a director of photography. That's how I made a living early in my career. And 10% of the work was my own, right? And I made a really conscious decision quite a while ago that each and every year I would do everything in my power to inch that needle more towards my end of the spectrum and away from others. And so every year I've been able to do that. So whereas once upon a time it was 90% working for other people, now it's about 90% working for me and 10% for other people. So it's worked, but it's sort of a marathon and you kind of have to stick to it. So the short answer is I follow my own muse now. And I select my own projects, and if they pass that so what test and I can work to get the access that I feel like is vital to tell the story well, then I will.
Okay, that definitely kind of brings up another question. So you do you speak Arabic?
I don't.
No, or Pashto or Dari or Aramaic or Armenian or French?
I do not. I speak Swedish and English.
Right.
And some Spanish.
Yeah. So what draws you to that part of the world? To my eye, and I'm not American. I'm broadly speaking from the Balkans. I am interested to know, because there is an enormous border crisis or a refugee or asylum seeker crisis in your own country. So what has drawn your eye towards a part of the world where you are inevitably an outsider, and your access, it's extraordinary, the access you've had, but it's still there's a sort of, to my eye, remove from the subject. Versus doing that, in the southern U.S.
Mm-hmm. So I have to go back 3 or 4 projects or more to answer that question. So the the last trilogy of films that I did on the global refugee crisis came out of a chance meeting I had with a Syrian American physician. Okay. And I broke my hand, and he was my orthopedic hand surgeon, and just totally by chance, right? And so he did his 10-minute consult with me. He assessed that I needed surgery, and then somehow inexplicably we started talking about the Syrian conflict, which had just begun at that point. And I'll never forget, he stood up and pulled the privacy curtain around us, and we talked for the next 45 minutes or so about what was happening in Syria at the time. And at the end of that just completely random human contact of two human beings talking about something that felt really vital and important and timely, I handed him my card, and I said, if you ever decide to go back, let me know. And he did. And so that film, 50 Feet from Syria, was really following a colleague who became a friend, who was a volunteer surgeon operating on refugees flowing across the border from Syria into Turkey. So that was the beginning in terms of the work in that region. It wasn't directly intentional. It was really, in terms of focusing on that region, it was intentional to follow this human being who I felt like was doing vital and important work on this particular refugee crisis. And, to a great extent, that's an English language plus Arabic film. So, but through an American lens.
Yeah, the rhetoric of welcome has changed for asylum seekers, I think, globally, like certainly in Europe, in Central and Northern Europe especially, and in the US and Canada. What do you think is the cause of that? Where is it going, etc.?
Yeah, I wish the current tensions were different, sort of on the global landscape. But one of the reasons I wanted to do a trilogy of films about, global migration and displacement due to war was because it's grown so exponentially, and it continues to grow, and our systems in place aren't addressing it well in most places in the world. Not just the Middle East, right? There's the Darien Gap between South America and Central America, right? That's a huge crisis point right now. There's the southern U.S. border. I mean, we could name 4, 5, or 6 different places, that don't have the systems in place to properly address the scale of the crisis. And I think that's the core problem, right? Is as a global community, as a coalition of nations, we haven't scaled up our asylum seeker sort of scaffolding to address the current scale of need. And until that happens, I think the level of rhetoric, both positive and negative, surrounding the needs of asylum seekers and those countries who either do or don't want to receive them is only going to get more difficult. But I think fundamentally it's a problem of we haven't addressed the problem properly based on the reality that's facing us as a global community.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Do you think that sort of the West is suffering from a diminishment or like just we're basically out of the resource of empathy to some extent, like after lockdown and with inflationary, like financial pressures, is it becoming more difficult to care about conflict elsewhere?
Well, I think that's always a danger, right? There's always a danger to turn someone into the other, right? Or to not acknowledge their humanity. and I think it becomes even more dangerous once things scale up to where they are now, right? Because if we look at a single human being in a concrete crisis, let's say it's a car crash. You're on the street corner, a car crashes in front of you, and there's 2 people injured in the car crash. Research and science shows, studies have been done on this, that we are likely to respond, right? We're likely to see in that individual, our brother or our sister or our mother or our father or our partner, because it's one person right in front of us or two people right in front of us and we can relate. As soon as those numbers change significantly and scale up to, say, 100 people or 1,000 people, we lose that same relatability to the scale of crisis, and we start to divorce ourselves from engagement. And there's a lot of science surrounding this that supports it. And there's probably 4 or 5 different terms for it. I don't remember what all of them are right now. But I think that fundamentally that's part of the problem right now is that the problem is so large. There are so many people displaced all over the world that we think someone else will take care of the problem. We think that's someone else's problem. And as long as that's an overarching mentality, we're not going to get it done.
Yeah, that's a huge project. I think that if we're like I want to stay away for at least another 10 minutes from positing solutions, right? Because I think that I'm very interested in your filmmaking and your process, and I think that probably like the sort of like theoretical framework or grounding, because I worked for in international development, and so I know the size of some of these projects, the money, the will, the politicking around all of that, the funding, it's very complex, and it's its own sort of like, like the NGO industrial complex is called that for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you, in regards to documentary filmmaking, you've said, if you believe in it, do it, and don't let anyone tell you it can't be done, which I'm a big believer in. Ask for forgiveness, if not permission, that. Don't even ask for forgiveness. Just do the thing that needs to be done, right? So I want to ask, what's the first story that you ever felt had to be told?
Oh boy, good question. For myself personally, that I feel compelled to tell?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a train derailment in Montana, and it released a deathly cloud of chlorine. And this is a couple decades ago, maybe 15 to 20 years ago. And it was, for the most part, swept underneath the rug by local officials and by very skilled, high-paid attorneys who took care of the human problems surrounding the spill. Right? And there was very little media surrounding it. And I was just out of grad school, and I thought, wow, these poor human beings who lived in this little community outside Missoula, they have no voice, right? No one has sort of helped them get the word out about what happened to them and all the medical complications that many of them were facing. So I went into the community, and we started having these conversations, and they invited me to do my best as a filmmaker who was not yet a filmmaker, someone who wanted to be a filmmaker, to try to tell their story. And so I did that just with one person, me, and a camera, and did the best I could as a fledgling filmmaker to try to help them get the word out about it. It's the only film that I've ever done that has never found distribution.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Everything else I've done has landed where it needs to land.
So that's a very timely topic now. So I'm wondering if maybe I know where you are.
Yeah, right. It is timely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the fact that continues to go on, and the debacle. I mean, like none of the regulatory bodies are interested to change anything foundationally. Yeah, and that's definitely a spot where civil society or NGOs or even citizens aren't going to be empowered to make those changes, right?
That's right.
Yeah. When you spoke with Lex Friedman about your favorite documentaries, you brought up the Hungarian film, Woman Captured.
Yeah.
A verite style film in which the filmmaker becomes a de facto activist. I want to ask you about that impulse, and have you ever felt like putting the camera down to intervene in the things you're capturing on film?
Yeah. Yes. It's complicated for me though, because I have conflicted feelings about it, that go way back. Um, have you heard me talk about Lifeboat at all?
Yeah, and I mean, I have, and I've watched your films and your interviews. So I'm
Yeah.
asking a question I kind of know the answer to, but I wanted our listeners to be able to
Yeah.
get there with you, kind of,
So you've seen Lifeboat then. So right before I shot Lifeboat, I had a really interesting experience. So there's some of you may know a very famous filmmaker, who has sort of like godlike status in my field, named Frederick Wiseman. And he's probably done 60 films over the course of his career, but he really is known as sort of the father of either direct cinema or observational cinema, where it's fly on the wall, and you simply observe what happens. Right before I shot Lifeboat, so I had sort of, through much of my career, sort of adhered to this notion that the best nonfiction is observational. That the best documentaries are fly on the wall direct cinema. At least that's what I aspired to, right? And so I heard Frederick Wiseman speak at a conference right before I shot Lifeboat, and he did this beautiful presentation about sort of his philosophy surrounding direct cinema, and he showed some clips along the way. And one of the things he did was he showed a clip of one of his older films. I don't remember the name of it at this point, but it was a clip probably from the 60s, and it was observational cinema, direct cinema, sort of documenting police interaction with a sex worker or a prostitute.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know the film.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So he shows this, and it's a brutal scene. Like, there is brutality being leveraged against this poor woman, and Frederick Wiseman just films. He does what he believes in and does so well, which is observe both the good and bad of humanity, right, and just watches it. And then he talks about it afterwards. And I remember watching that clip, asking myself, "Is that what I believe?" And I wasn't sure what my answer was at that moment in time. I immediately left, I think within a week or two, to go shoot Lifeboat. And within, 3 or 4 days of beginning that project, I was faced with a very similar situation where there were thousands of people in sinking rafts and boats on the ocean, and 15 or 16 of us on our rescue vessel, and people were drowning in front of us. And we had a decision to make: either film them drown in front of us, or interact with them in a different way. And I will say that I thought about Frederick Wiseman in that moment, but for me it was a completely different choice. We put our cameras down in the Zodiacs, and we started pulling people out of the ocean. And I think that's the only choice I personally could have made as a human being and still sleep at night. So that's where I've come to over the years. It's a very different place. And I guess my ethical line in the sand is, if as a human being, put the filmmaking piece to the side, if as a human being I have the opportunity to prevent someone from death, from dying, or from grievous bodily harm, then to me that's far more important than making a film. And so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I thank you so much for answering that in that way. I think for me, it's the one thing that changes a sort of like gruesome voyeurism into something truly human and humane, if that makes sense, right? Whereas I think Weitzman, especially that the part that you talked about, to me is horrific because of as a viewer, my feeling of impotent rage at what's happening, and it's just a feeling of like nothing can be done, nothing will be done if even the act of observing this isn't making this person rethink what they're doing. Nothing can be done. Whereas in your films, as brutal as they are kind of to watch, there's a sense of like something can and should be done. So let's move towards that. When speaking with Lex Friedman, you said Biden campaigned partly on the promise that the U.S. would regain its moral prominence on the world stage and would prioritize a moral paradigm. Can we talk a bit about that? Because for my part, I don't. I'll just ask you the question. Is it your understanding that globally the U.S. has now, or in the past 60 years, moral authority of any kind?
That feels like a trap.
I mean,
well said. Well done. I don't know. Gosh, that's such a complex question with, I think, so many answers. Has America done great things on the world stage? Yes.
Yes.
We have. Whether it's the medical field or technology. I mean, look at the internet, for example, right? Like, we have been leaders in so many ways. And, I'm not old enough to go back to World War II, but if you look at U.S. actions post-World War II, we were a huge part of the rebuilding effort in Europe. Like,
the Bretton Woods institutions, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many wonderful things we have done that have contributed to bettering the world. Where I don't necessarily feel that way now, today, in contemporary American politics. And that saddens me deeply. I feel like, so much of our political firepower nowadays is not really used to better the world necessarily, but to shore up strategic alliances that have to do with oil and many other things, right? And I wish our resources were used differently, but that's where our political power seems to go. And I think until that changes, we won't regain any sort of moral political compass on the world stage. We won't be that moral leader that I think we have the cultural power to be, but have lost sight of.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. It wasn't a gotcha question. I really wanted to know because you, in some of your interviews, you do come across as a true believer in what probably parts of the global South would frame as a kind of American exceptionalism that hasn't been, that whole like regime change impulse. These are things that are very unwelcome and bring instability and war to the great detriment of civilians, the civilian population in these countries, right? Mm-hmm. So it continues to be my concern. Like, what I love about the American spirit is that spirit of innovation and trying to kind of like raise the sea level for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. So I became involved in international development, but I do think that America has its own project internally to take on, if that makes sense. Huh?
Yeah. I've often said that we have so many things to solve here, right? And if I had a magic wand, one of the first things I would do is I would wave it, and I would wave it at our educational system. And one of the things I would transform immediately is early education civics that is thorough and global in nature. So it isn't just U.S. focused and U.S. politics focused, but also language. Right? We are so siloed within the English language. I'm a perfect example of that, right? I speak 2 1/4 languages, right? And I had to fight tooth and nail to get there, and it wasn't from the educational system, right? It's like I had to take it on myself. Whereas, if you go to school in Sweden, for example, a 6-year-old will speak 4 or 5 languages by the time they're 6. And that's a great loss. Right, that's a great loss for us as a nation and a people, but it's also a great loss for, I think, our ability to engage with the rest of the world in important and powerful and fundamental ways. And so I would wave that magic wand and make sure that language acquisition was a key part of our educational system in a way it isn't now. And the second thing I'd do is I'd say that I think I'd build in sort of a gap year model where that you didn't get your high school diploma, until you studied abroad for 3 months in a foreign country. Full stop. Because that would so fully engage us with the rest of the world at a perfect moment in people's development, right? Before they go off in the world and have a career.
Great. I would elect you as president of the U.S. tomorrow. I like it. That's a good platform. I think those are what we would call strategic resources, right? Like access to education, access to democratic participation in elections and so forth. In my view, America has some work to do on the access to basic resources, right? Like tens of millions of people go to sleep hungry in America each year. More than 1.2 million people struggle to put food on the table at some point last year in Washington, D.C. 41% of U.S. adults currently have debt caused by medical or dental bills. It's rising up to $145 billion in debt because of like dubious medical debt and accrued penalties and so forth in the U.S. 6,000 migrants per day, on average, were apprehended after illegally crossing the border. That's over 2.2 million apprehensions in just one 12-month period in 2022. These are enormous problems that won't be, I don't think will be solved by NGOs. What power and what channels do Americans have to kind of like retake control of their own state apparati. English is my third language, so I try to use it carefully and specifically, but sometimes fail. In any case, what power do Americans have to regain access to those strategic and basic resources so that they can be empowered to once again take the world stage in a moral and ethical way?
Well, this is going to sound a little trite probably, but way back in college, a professor once said to me, he gave me the bumper sticker slogan, think globally, act locally, right? Which has been around forever. But I think there's a reason it's been around forever. There's some real truth there. And I think in a strange lateral sort of way, it's how I think in regards to my films, right? You've seen a couple of them, it sounds like, at this point. I don't try to take on, the story of 200,000 people in my films, right? I'm a believer in the individual story to speak for the larger issue because we'll care about an individual human being, right?
Absolutely.
As we talked about before. In a similar sense, I think where our power lies, our sphere of influence, is those we come into contact with on a daily basis, right? And I think that's where we start. We start in our own communities and we start building out, well, what needs to be done on this street? What needs to be done in this community? And who can I engage with to make those changes? And if enough of us do that, right, those overlapping circles will fill out around us. Now, do we need to think strategically about, federal issues and our federal government? Of course, right? We need to do everything we can to make sure they're doing the will of the people. But I think where our real power lies is across the room, right? Is the person who's in front of you.
Completely agree.
That's what I try to focus on.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that's also like instinct. It has like the ring of truthiness. Like I think that's something that's easy for people to access across. Like you talked about the things you bear witness to that those have no language. Right, in some of your interviews, and I agree, because that's the human reaction to the experience of another individual human. So when we cease trying to quantify it and we get into the qualitative experience of another human, I think that's where we're strongest. We connect with that. So we have just a few minutes left, and I will open the phone lines. We have a caller and we have a question in the chat from a few moments ago. Are documentary films art?
Wow. I think they can be. And the answer is sometimes. That's my view. I think there are a lot of documentaries that aren't, that are didactic in nature, that are intended to simply inform. In a sort of objective fashion, because the documentary field is, it's not only one thing, right? It's many things, and there's an incredible spectrum of style and genre within the larger documentary field, and I think the closer a filmmaker comes to speaking in the syntax of images, the closer to art it will be. So I think the documentaries that use words a lot tend to be more didactic and more educational in nature, and probably are further away from that label of art. But there are beautiful, beautiful films out in the world now that are generated every year by my colleagues who I think are beautiful art, that speak in the language of cinema, right? That are driven by images, that have their own syntax, that are absolutely art. And that's what I'm drawn to. Certainly, those are the films that I enjoy the most, and that move me and inspire me as a filmmaker to go out and do my next film.
Mm-hmm. One of my, if I can just share briefly, one of my earliest and most continues to be my favorite documentary is a film called Latkodrom by a documentary filmmaker called Tony Gatliff, mm-hmm. and it's a bit in like the magic realist style in that, there's no words, there's literally no words. He travels across, kind of across the world, tracing the development of music and culture of Romani people, from their origins in Rajasthan and all through North Africa and Europe and so forth, and just like films their celebratory dances and musics and suffering, joy, everything. And it continues to be just one of my favorite things to watch. So highly recommend.
I think there's a direct correlation for me between the number of words and how much I enjoy a film, at least a documentary film. The fewer the words, usually the more I enjoy it.
Same. Yeah. And that's why it's my favorite genre, even if it's difficult. I find that it's the most engaging of the most human innermost part of myself is engaging with real people. I don't need it narrativized. I just need my humanity to see their humanity, you know? So we will briefly take a caller if that's all right. I know that we only have you for a few more moments. Go ahead, IDK.
Hi. Yeah, my question is pretty simple, so it won't take a lot of time. I love documentaries because I feel like when we're in the moment, hearing, say, like mainstream media news reports on things, we're not going to get the whole truth. And we're not going to until everything is all said and done. And later, when people are willing to admit to things that they wouldn't, as it's happening because of their agendas. And I guess my big question for you is, do you have any interest, intention, future projects centered around the censorship that's going on right now? Because that's driving me absolutely up a wall. And I would like to know, or if you have any knowledge of any other projects in the works that's going to, address what we're living through with this.
I don't personally, but I know of at least one colleague who's really well established in the documentary field who does have one in the works. I'm blanking the working title of the project right now, but it's a feature doc about exactly what you just articulated, frankly. And I think it's going to be done by the end of this year. I wish I could remember the working title, but I don't. So I would say keep your eyes out for release. I think it's a Netflix doc around the end of 23. So there are really good filmmakers working on that topic, though, as they should be.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. All right. Well, in respect for your time and your project, we will like to thank you very, very much for joining us today. Mr. Skye Fitzgerald, Pangburn, Travis has posted a link to the Twitter for Spin Film. Do you also have a personal Twitter where we can follow you, or is that's your...
Nope, just that one.
Just that one, okay. Yeah. Are you on any other socials where we can...
Instagram. Which is just spin_film.
Okay.
And that's the main one. Then I have a Facebook page for Spin Film as well.
Great. And how soon will we hear what this next project is that you're working on?
We'll probably go public with it in about a month.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Yep, thank you.
See you all again soon. We have some more excellent rooms coming up. Thank you all for joining me today. I've been having some technical issues with publishing these rooms after the fact, so hopefully this will work. Anyway, I really, really appreciate you all joining me today, and I hope to see you all again very soon. Goodbye for now.